here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. Well, I'm here today to talk about my favorite way to preserve eggs and why through the years I've changed how I do things and why I don't do things certain other ways. And just so you know, some of this is going to depend on your storage space. It's going to depend even on where you live, your climate, how hot it gets. So let me go ahead and get right into this. And I'll say right off the bat, my favorite way is dehydrating. And I have a video on how to dehydrate eggs and keep them in a raw form so they're best for using and cooking and baking and more. But let's first talk about when I first started putting up the excess eggs for my chickens. What I was doing then is I actually still, believe it or not, had a working food saver, whatever. And I would use the bags, and I think I did a video on this, and I would freeze them, usually 2 eggs at a time, and just, pull the air out with the food saver, seal the bag up. And I found that worked really well. Those got us through the winter, no problem. And I had extra. So then somebody clued me into the idea to try breast milk bags. So I tried that, and that was okay. But what I found in most cases after a year of them sitting in there, if you don't use them up right away, they take on a really odd flavor. And I thought, okay, it must be because of the plastic. So then I started freezing them in little 4-ounce jars, because you can usually fit 2 eggs in a 4-ounce jar just perfectly. And I thought that would work well because it's glass instead of plastic. Nope, same thing. After sitting in there for a couple of years, because usually what happens is I just never need all those eggs in there, and I'll explain more why in a bit on that. And it's not always because I have chickens laying all winter long, because some winters no chickens are laying. It's not that they spoil, they just take on this odd flavor and sometimes even this odd smell that it was almost like a fishy smell. It's really strange. So what I end up doing is cooking them up. I'll cook up several a day, get them out of my freezer, feed them to the dog, feed them to the chickens. They don't care. And so that's why I stopped doing that. The only thing I do like having at least maybe a couple of jars of frozen eggs, as long as they're fresh from that year, keeping them in the freezer just in case through the winter, if I don't have any fresh eggs coming in, I can use those to make mayonnaise, because that's one of the things I found that frozen eggs works best for, is making homemade mayonnaise. And yes, I have a video on how to make mayonnaise, and I will link to that in the description box down below, along with the egg dehydrating video. Another thing I like to do with eggs that you could likely use for preservation if you have cool storage area would be to ferment them. Now, I do not ferment eggs for long-term storage. I ferment them just because sometimes I like to eat them like that. So usually I'll only do a quart jar of them at a time, which is usually around a dozen eggs I think I can fit in a quart jar, I think, if I remember correctly. And I have a video on fermenting eggs if you'd like to learn how. I just love hard-boiled eggs, but I love them most when they're fermented, especially with different herbs and spices, because they add so much flavor to the hard-boiled eggs. But I would think you could probably store them for at least a few months that way, as long as it was kept in a cold storage somewhere. Now, another method that I considered but has still have yet to try, my friend has, she's really happy with it, and there's a lot of people out there doing it. It's an old-fashioned method called water glass. And it's called water glass because that's the name of the chemical. That's the common name for the chemical used in the water glass method. If I were to do it, I personally would go with the lime water. And I've since learned that you don't have to use the slaked lime. You could actually use the lime that's not toxic for doing that. So I was like, okay, that's cool. I think it's pickling lime. Some of you who are doing that method can share down below. But I'm going to share with you why I don't use that method. Number one, it takes up a lot of space because you got to have these big jars. You're keeping your eggs whole, and then you have to have them fully submerged in the liquid. And that just takes up so much more room in food storage than dehydrating. Now, yes, with that method, you're going to find that there's a few more things that you can use those eggs for than you could with the dehydrated eggs. So dehydrated eggs are excellent for using in baked goods, for making cookies, pancakes, sweet breads, cakes, or anything like that that you need to add eggs to. They're also good to just cook up as is. You just add some water or milk to it and then just cook them up. They make a great scrambled egg. In fact, here's an image right here where I made some scrambled eggs, threw some, I don't remember what's in there, some onions, garlic and whatnot in there, maybe some tomatoes. And they're great, especially if you can dehydrate them in a raw form. Keep them as raw as possible. I'm saying don't cook them first and dehydrate them raw. And you'll learn about that in that video. And before I continue, I'm going to touch on this again because there's always going to be that one person that just freaks out about salmonella. Well, first of all, I have no intentions, and never have, of just eating the raw egg powder out of the jar. I don't know who would do that. Also, salmonella is just not something that scares me anyway. But also, let me ask you this question. Do you cook an egg before you then scramble it and cook it? Do you cook an egg before you add it to your pancake batter? Do you cook an egg before you add it to your cookie dough? No, you're not going to do that. That's silly. You add it raw. So raw egg powder is going to work a lot better in your baked goods than using cooked egg powder. You can cook up eggs and dehydrate them, and then at that point they're only good for scrambled eggs. I've had some people say they don't taste as good as the ones that they used from the raw form. Now, about the space, right here is just about 3 dozen eggs in this 1 quart jar. These are from 2022, and I have 6 quart jars that I did in 2022 in storage. I haven't needed to dip into them. But this jar right here is the one I'm currently working through. Some of the eggs in here probably go back to, well, whenever I first started dehydrating the eggs, if it was either 2020 or 2021. Still good. And these ones aren't even vacuum sealed. They still smell good. They still smell like eggs. I still use them as I need. However, the reason I still have all these eggs in food storage is because I haven't needed to dip into them. Now, it'll probably be a good idea that I start using them and working through them. But here's the other thing too, is I like to see just how long they're going to last. You see that color? Look at how beautiful that color still looks after 2 years of being back there in food storage. No problem. Of course, I do keep, it's a cool room. It's one of our son's old bedrooms that we converted into a pantry. We have dark blackout curtains over the windows to prevent light exposure and so on and so forth. And then, of course, the vacuum sealing is going to help keep them fresher for much longer, though it's not absolutely necessary because this isn't vacuum sealed. I keep this right here. It's what I can grab and use when I'm making cookies or anything else. So here's the other reason why I wouldn't do the lime water / water glass method. So I think it's after somewhere between 6 months to a year. It's probably going to depend on the eggs. It's probably going to depend on where you live. The eggs will start to get watery, and they're good for less than they would be when they're fresh at that point. You can still scramble them up and use them, and they're still going to be good. But you might not be able to use them the same way you use other eggs. And the purpose of the water glassing is to get someone through the season that the egg production has slowed down, or there's no eggs coming in the darkest part of winter. And so, but here's the thing about if you are like us and you live in a cool climate, and you have a cool enough area to store your unwashed eggs. Like I have here this basket of, these are my most current eggs that usually what I do once I get so many, I'll wash them up. I put them in cartons and then have them ready to sell, or have them in the fridge ready for us to eat. But the thing is, if your eggs are unwashed, you can leave them for quite a few months in a cool area. It doesn't have to be in your fridge, because the bloom on the eggs is going to preserve the eggs as is. And then just keeping them in a cool place, they can last for quite a few months. And so the time length is, when you live in a cool enough climate, is probably pretty similar to the water glass lime water method. So, but again, that's going to depend on your location. If you live in a warmer climate and you never have a cool season, then I would assume that the water glass method is going to be the best choice if you're wanting to keep your eggs in a whole form rather than having them in a scrambled form. But I have just had no need to do that, because even after I wash my eggs and put them in the refrigerator, they will still last months. And usually by the time I finally get to the last eggs, sometimes I might have a couple that are bad. It's rare, but it does happen where I might have a couple that are bad when even the ones stored in the fridge when I get to that last egg. But by then, usually my chickens have started laying again. And so I haven't needed to fall back on my dehydrated eggs. So these are more, and the reason I put up so many in 2022 was just in case something happened to my chickens. Let's say I lost my whole flock to some kind of disease, or maybe a raccoon did get to them or something and just wiped them all out. I mean, that can happen. Then I want to know that I have eggs to fall back on. And so that's why these are put up intentionally for long-term food storage. And so I know they're there if anything happens at all. But yes, your eggs just like this, unwashed, especially if you live in a cool climate or you at least have like a root cellar or some cool place to store them, they're going to keep for quite a few months without issue. If you're concerned and you're not sure how, if they're bad or not, there's that little floating trick you can do where you get some water, you drop your eggs in there one at a time. Or if you get a big bowl and put water in it, you put your eggs in there. The eggs that sink to the bottom, they're still real good. If they're floating like this, where they're like this, that means they're kind of at that threshold of going bad. And if they're completely floating at the top, then they're bad, and you need to just toss them at that point. And I've used that on a couple occasions just to check eggs, but normally I don't. If I start getting down to old eggs, I crack them open into a separate dish one at a time and check them first. It's always best to actually crack your eggs into a separate bowl, even if you're buying store-bought, just in case, rather than putting it directly into whatever, your pancake batter, your cookie batter, and so on. That's just the best way to go, because you don't want to have all your ingredients and then add eggs and then open up the egg and find out that it was rotten or something like that, and then you have to throw the whole thing out and start over. So I don't always do that, but it is a good method to practice. But I definitely do that when I know I'm getting down to the old eggs. I'll remember to do it that way. So anyway, that's why I do that. And again, if you want to check out all the steps I use to dehydrate, where I talk about temperature, time, and how I use the dried eggs and the ways I've used them so far, check out that video. Again, you'll find it in the description box down below with any other links that I think might be helpful to you. But if you're wanting to freeze the eggs, I suggest it can be a great method. I just highly recommend you use them up within the year. So anyway, that's it. I just want to put that out there again. It seems like every year I'm shooting a video like this, but just got to remind people. And also because I get questions like, how are your eggs doing now 2 years later? Still good. Still good. Still vacuum sealed. I could open these and check them, but I know there's no need to, because these eggs are even older and they're not vacuum sealed and they're good. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. So please share your thoughts and ideas down below in comments. And thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.